The Devourer's Veil. It began with a faint shimmer in the sky, an almost imperceptible distortion that caught the eye of a farmer tending to his crops in rural Nebraska. At first, he thought it was heat waves rising from the fields under the scorching summer sun. But as the days passed, the shimmer grew darker, denser, until it became unmistakable, a vast, undulating cloud descending slowly from the heavens. It moved without wind, without sound, as though it were alive but not bound by the rules of nature. Its surface writhed and pulsed, a grotesque tapestry of shifting colors that seemed to shift between hues of black, purple, and sickly green. The cloud did not stay confined to the skies for long. On the third day, tendrils began to stretch downward, probing the earth like searching fingers. Wherever they touched, life ceased to exist. Grass turned to ash. Trees crumbled into dust. Animals that ventured too close vanished instantly, their bodies absorbed into the mass. Panic spread through nearby towns as people realized this was no ordinary storm. It was something far worse, something unnatural. News outlets struggled to make sense of the phenomenon. Scientists scrambled to gather data, deploying drones and satellites to study the entity. Early reports described it as a massive cloud of organic matter, a living organism unlike anything ever recorded. The substance seemed to grow larger with every passing hour, feeding on everything it encountered. What little information they managed to collect painted a chilling picture. The entity consumed biomass indiscriminately, breaking it down on a molecular level and incorporating it into its own structure. Governments around the world convened emergency meetings, but no one had answers. Military forces were mobilized, yet no weapon seemed capable of harming the invader. Missiles fired at the cloud simply disappeared into its depths, swallowed whole without resistance. Fighter jets sent to investigate returned with pilots shaken and silent, their eyes wide with terror. Desperate attempts to contain the spread failed miserably. Barriers erected along highways and rivers proved useless as the entity oozed over them, indifferent to human efforts to stop it. By the end of the first week, the entity had grown to cover hundreds of miles. Entire cities lay abandoned, their streets empty save for the eerie silence left behind. Survivors spoke in hushed tones about the horrors they had witnessed, pets vanishing mid-stride, buildings crumbling into nothingness, and the suffocating feeling of being watched by something vast and incomprehensible. Fear gripped the nation, then the world, as the realization dawned. Humanity was facing an enemy it could neither fight nor flee from. The entity continued its relentless advance, spreading across continents with terrifying speed. No one knew where it had come from, or why it had chosen Earth. All anyone could do was watch helplessly as it consumed everything in its path, leaving barren wastelands in its wake. For the first time in history, humanity stood united not in triumph, but in despair as the shadow of extinction loomed closer with each passing day. Megan Harper was an astrophysicist working at a small research facility in Colorado when news of the entity reached her. She had spent years studying the cosmos, searching for signs of life beyond Earth. Her work often kept her isolated, buried in data and equations, but the arrival of the cloud forced her out of her routine. When the government called for experts to analyze the phenomenon, she volunteered without hesitation. If there was any chance to understand what was happening, she wanted to be part of it. Her first encounter with the entity came during a field mission. A team of scientists, including Megan, was sent to the edge of the growing mass to collect samples. They wore protective suits designed to shield them from radiation and toxins, though no one knew if they would actually work against this thing. As they approached the pulsating cloud, Megan felt a strange sensation, as though the air itself was pressing down on her chest. Her breath quickened, and her hands trembled inside her gloves. The team set up equipment to extract a small piece of the entity for analysis. Megan watched as a robotic arm extended toward the cloud, scooping up a fragment of the writhing mass. The moment the sample was secured, the cloud reacted. Tendrils shot out faster than anyone could react, wrapping around the robot and pulling it into the abyss. The team scrambled back, shouting warnings and tripping over their gear. One scientist fell, his suit tearing as he hit the ground. Before anyone could reach him, the tendrils found him. He screamed only once before he was gone, absorbed into the mass. Megan froze, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She stared at the spot where the man had been just moments before, her mind struggling to process what she had seen. The others dragged her away, yelling for her to move, but her legs felt like lead. The memory of his scream echoed in her ears long after they returned to the safety of their vehicles. That night, back at the facility, Megan couldn't sleep. She replayed the scene over and over in her mind, trying to make sense of it. The way the cloud had moved, it wasn't random. It had targeted the robot, then the fallen scientist. It had acted with purpose. She sat at her desk, staring at the vial containing the tiny fragment of the entity they had managed to retrieve. Under the microscope, it looked alive, pulsing faintly, almost like a heartbeat. She shivered, though the room was warm. For the first time in her career, Megan felt truly afraid. This wasn't just an unknown phenomenon. It was alive, intelligent, and hungry, and it was learning. As the entity continued its inexorable march across the globe, scientists worked tirelessly to unravel the mysteries of its composition and behavior. Initial observations revealed that the cloud-like mass was composed of countless microscopic organisms, each resembling a gelatinous blob with tendrils extending outward like grasping arms. These organisms moved in perfect synchrony, forming the larger, pulsating mass visible to the naked eye. Under high-power microscopes, researchers identified structures within the blobs that appear to serve as sensory organs, capable of detecting vibrations, heat, and even electromagnetic signals. This suggested that the entity was not merely a mindless predator, but possessed some form of awareness. Further analysis uncovered another alarming characteristic: the ability to adapt. Samples collected from different regions showed subtle variations in the composition of the organisms. In areas where the entity had encountered dense forests, the organisms exhibited enhanced enzymes for breaking down cellulose. Near industrial zones, they developed mechanisms to metabolize synthetic materials such as plastics and metals. This adaptability extended beyond physical changes. Behavioral patterns also shifted depending on environmental conditions. For instance, when confronted with large groups of humans attempting to flee, the mass would split into smaller clusters, surrounding and isolating individuals before consuming them. What terrified the scientific community most was the evidence of learning. Observations indicated that the entity's movements became more efficient over time, avoiding obstacles and exploiting weaknesses in human defenses. In one chilling incident, a military convoy transporting supplies to a refugee camp was ambushed by tendrils that seemed to anticipate their route, cutting off escape routes and forcing the soldiers into a desperate last stand. The entity did not act randomly, it strategized. Equally disturbing was the discovery that the entity retained traces of what it consumed. Fragments of DNA, chemical compounds, and even fragments of technology were found embedded within its structure. This raised a horrifying possibility that it was not only consuming life, but assimilating it, using the knowledge and traits of its victims to evolve further. One researcher likened it to a living archive, preserving pieces of every species it devoured. The implications were staggering. If true, the entity was not just a destroyer, but a collector, harvesting the essence of entire ecosystems to fuel its growth. Theories about its origins multiplied, but none provided definitive answers. Some speculated it might be a biological weapon gone rogue, created by an advanced civilization and accidentally unleashed upon the galaxy. Others believed it could be a natural phenomenon, a primordial force of destruction akin to a cosmic plague. Regardless of its origin, one fact remained clear. The entity was intelligent, adaptable, and utterly ruthless in its pursuit of expansion. Humanity's greatest fear was no longer whether it could survive, but whether it could outthink a predator that learned faster than any human mind could comprehend. As the entity continued its devastating advance, a team of astrophysicists working in a secure underground facility made a discovery that chilled them to the core. Analyzing deep space transmissions intercepted by Earth's telescopes, they uncovered faint but unmistakable signals emanating from distant star systems. These signals carried patterns eerily similar to those emitted by the entity now consuming Earth. The implications were staggering. This was not the first planet to fall victim to the cloud-like invader. Countless worlds across the galaxy had already been erased, their civilizations reduced to barren wastelands. The team pieced together fragmented data from multiple sources, cross-referencing anomalies detected in dying stars and planets with unusual atmospheric compositions. One particularly haunting piece of evidence came from a nearby exoplanet located in the Andromeda Galaxy. Once teeming with life, the planet now resembled a desolate husk, its atmosphere stripped away and its surface littered with the skeletal remains of cities. Spectral analysis revealed traces of organic compounds identical to those found in the entity currently ravaging Earth. It was as though the planet had been drained of every ounce of life, leaving behind only the faintest echoes of what once thrived there. Further investigation revealed similar patterns on dozens of other planets. Each one told the same story: rapid ecological collapse followed by total annihilation. The entity didn't discriminate between simple organisms and advanced civilizations. It consumed everything, leaving nothing but barren rock and dust in its wake. The realization struck Megan like a physical blow. Humanity wasn't facing an isolated threat. It was battling a force that had already extinguished countless species across the universe. The implications weighed heavily on her. If the entity had destroyed so many worlds before reaching Earth, what hope did humanity have? Yet, amid the despair, Megan clung to one thought: survival. Somewhere, somehow, someone must have found a way to resist, or at least delay the inevitable. She poured herself into the research, determined to uncover any clue that might give humanity a fighting chance. Megan spent every waking moment in the lab, poring over data and running simulations. Sleep became a luxury she could no longer afford. Her colleagues noticed the dark circles under her eyes and the way her hands trembled as she handled equipment, but no one dared ask if she was okay. Everyone was stretched thin, their nerves frayed by the constant threat looming outside. Her breakthrough came unexpectedly. While analyzing the fragment retrieved from the field mission, she noticed something strange. The microscopic organisms within the sample seemed to react to certain frequencies of sound. At first, the reaction was subtle, a slight slowing of movement, but as she adjusted the frequency, the organisms began to break apart. It was as though the sound disrupted their cohesion, causing them to dissolve into inert matter. Excited but cautious, Megan shared her findings with the team. They immediately began testing the effect on larger samples. The results were promising. When exposed to specific sound waves, the entity's growth slowed significantly. It wasn't a cure, but it was a weapon away to buy time. The discovery reignited a flicker of hope within Megan. For the first time since the entity's arrival, she allowed herself to believe that humanity might stand a chance. But the cost of failure was unimaginable. If they couldn't replicate the effect on a large scale, the entity would continue its rampage unchecked. Megan knew the weight of responsibility resting on her shoulders. She couldn't afford to fail. With Megan's discovery, humanity launched a desperate plan. Massive speakers were constructed around the edges of the entity's territory, emitting the sound frequencies that disrupted its structure. At first, it worked. The entity recoiled, its advance halting as the sound waves tore through its mass. Cities that had been on the brink of destruction were spared for now, but the victory was short-lived. The entity adapted. Within days, it began to resist the sound waves, its organisms evolving thicker membranes to shield themselves. Megan watched in horror as the speakers lost their effectiveness, the entity surging forward once more. Her heart sank. She had given humanity a reprieve, but it wasn't enough. In a final act of defiance, Megan volunteered to lead a team into the heart of the entity. Armed with experimental devices designed to amplify the sound waves, they hoped to deliver a fatal blow. The mission was suicide, but Megan didn't care. If she could buy humanity even a few more hours, it would be worth it. As the team ventured deeper into pulsating mass, the air grew thick and heavy, pressing down on them like a physical weight. The tendrils closed in, sensing their presence. Megan activated the device, the sound waves rippling outward. For a moment, the entity faltered, its mass quivering and collapsing. But then it struck back, overwhelming the team in a surge of organic fury. Megan's last thought was of the stars. Somewhere out there, perhaps another species would find a way to stop the entity. Humanity had tried and failed, but the fight was not over. As the darkness closed in, she whispered a single word: survive. The entity consumed Earth, leaving behind a barren wasteland. But in the void of space, a faint signal lingered, a recording of Megan's discovery, transmitted to the stars. Somewhere light years away, another civilization received a message. They listened, studied, and prepared. The battle against the entity was far from over. The end. Thanks for watching.